My grandmother, Mary, is a survivor of the Nakba. For 77 years, she has survived under the perpetual brutality of the Zionist settler colonial regime that dispossessed her, displaced her, segregated her, separated her from her family, and treated her as subhuman in her own homeland. With each escalation of oppression over these decades, Israel further entrenches its apartheid regime and makes the process of dehumanization more elaborate and sophisticated, arriving at this moment in which we live, where Israel, for over 19 months now, is carrying the world's first live-stream genocide against 2.3 million Palestinians in occupied and besieged Gaza. At the entrance of the building where my grandmother lives in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood of occupied Jerusalem, Israeli settlers had sprayed graffiti with black paint over white wall, a Star of David, and the popular slogan often heard in the streets, in the media, and in football stadiums, Mavet la'Arabim, death to the Arabs. A slogan that is perhaps the clearest reflection of the intention Zionist settler colonialism maintains towards the indigenous Palestinians. I remember when I first saw the graffiti thinking that my grandmother and her neighbors had been marked on the list of Israel's ethnic cleansing. I was petrified. But my grandmother was unfazed. "We will never leave our home," she said. Our people's resilience and resistance for over a century of colonization, 77 years of ongoing Nakba, seen today in its bravest forms in Gaza, in the face of Israel's genocide, is the fading hope for all humanity. It is also a constant reminder of the failure of humanity to uphold the promise of a United Nations to ensure that never again, not only to the horrors of the Second World War and genocide in Europe, but also, as we in the Global South see it, never again must humanity suffer colonialism, enslavement, subjugation of nations, and today Gaza shows both the vital importance as well as the utter failure of such a promise. But what is this failure? It is not ignorance. The truth of Israel's genocide is clear from the onset. From the first days of Israel's attack on Gaza, the African Union, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, as well as states warned of genocide by name. A couple of weeks into the attack, Holocaust scholars, international law scholars, as well as UN independent experts started writing about this as an unfolding genocide, or even a textbook case of genocide. Later, in the first month of the genocide, UNICEF declared Gaza has become a graveyard for thousands of children. But I must note here that UNICEF failed to mention the identity of the victims as Palestinian children or that of the perpetrators as Israel's illegal occupation, something common in many UN statements until today. In March 2024, 6 months into Israel's onslaught, the Human Rights Council heard the report from the Special Rapporteur, Ms. Francesca Albanese, concluding that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the threshold indicating Israel's commission of genocide is met. In September 2024, the UN Special Committee to investigate Israeli practices reported that the policies and practices of Israel are consistent with the characteristics of genocide. In October 2024, a year into the genocide, the UN General Assembly heard from Ms. Albanese again how Israel's genocide is colonial erasure. For over 19 months of the genocide, where Israel has now killed over 53,000 Palestinians, the vast majority of them are women and children, the UN and its member states have received comprehensive documentation through the reports to the Human Rights Council, the General Assembly, and Security Council of Israel's intentional bombing of civilians, erasure of homes and civilian infrastructure, systematic attacks on medical workers and facilities, on journalists, on aid workers, use of starvation as a weapon, killing of UN staff and deliberately destroying UN facilities, forced disappearances, use of rape and sexual humiliation as a weapon, torture, and endless other horrors, all with no accountability, all with what the UN Secretary General calls total impunity. You cannot say you did not know. After all, Israel's genocide is live-streamed by both its perpetrators and its victims. The failure is also not in the lack or unclarity of the law. Our world has the legal frameworks necessary to describe and address Israel's documented criminality. In January 2024, less than 4 months into the genocide, the International Court of Justice, in the case brought by South Africa, acknowledged the plausibility and risk of genocide and has repeatedly ordered provisional measures. This triggered obligations on third states to prevent genocide by ending all complicity that might aid or assist in its commission. In July 2024, the International Court of Justice issued the advisory opinion which found that Israel's presence, including military occupation and illegal colonies in the OPT, is illegal, and that it is in breach of the prohibition of apartheid and racial segregation under Article 3 of CERD. The court also laid out the obligations on third states not to recognize, aid, or assist in maintaining Israel's occupation and apartheid. In September 2024, the UN General Assembly adopted the ICJ advisory opinion and for the first time in 42 years called on states to impose sanctions on Israel. In November 2024, the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Israeli leaders Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant for war crimes, crimes against humanity, particularly extermination. The failure is of states not upholding their obligations under international law to end any recognition, aid, or assistance that enables the crime of genocide and or helps Israel maintain its illegal presence in the occupied Palestinian territories and its decades-old regime of apartheid against all Palestinians. Israel is only able to carry out its unspeakable atrocity crimes because of the direct and indirect complicity of states, corporations, and institutions. Israel depends almost entirely on military and intelligence support from the US, Germany, and the UK, among others. Many other states, despite formally supporting a military embargo on Israel by voting for the UN General Assembly resolution of September 2024, still provide Israel with military and security support. States, including from the Global South, are also complicit in allowing the transit of US and other weapons to Israel. A number of states still supply Israel or allow the transit to Israel of energy to fuel the genocide, occupation, and apartheid. Israel is especially reliant on international trade and has free trade agreements with and other bilateral agreements with countries and regional blocs across the world. Such trade enables, if not directly contributes to, and finances the commission of Israel's crimes of genocide, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, among others. On the eve of the UN General Assembly vote adopting the ICJ advisory opinion, over 35 UN independent experts called on states upholding their obligation under international law by canceling or suspending economic relations, trade agreements, and academic relations with Israel that may contribute to its unlawful presence and apartheid regime in the occupied Palestinian territories. Yet, many states still maintain such relations with Israel in defiance of international law. The EU, for example, has failed to even review its association agreement with Israel, let alone cancel it, despite member states calling it to do so. States are also complicit by allowing corporations domiciled in their jurisdiction to contribute directly to Israel's crimes. After weapons manufacturers, technology is arguably the second most complicit sector in Israel's ongoing genocide and its underlying apartheid regime. For example, Israel's artificial intelligence targeting and weapons system, termed assassination factories, are enabled by tech giants, including Google, Amazon, Microsoft, IBM, Cisco, and Palantir. Some of these tech companies also help to collect and store massive amounts of Palestinian civilian data in Israel's population registry computing system, which is instrumental to Israel's apartheid. Yet, and I must note here, the UN contracts and partners with several of these tech companies, including in an upcoming conference, AI for Good, whitewashing their complicity in Israel's crimes and betraying its own responsibility to adopt clear ethical and legal policies guiding its procurement and corporate partnerships. But today, we see a global movement of millions of people mobilizing and organizing for effective solidarity with the Palestinian people. The BDS, Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions movement, akin to South African anti-apartheid movement of the last century, was established following the ICJ ruling of 2024 on the illegality of Israel's apartheid wall in the occupied West Bank. Over the past 19 months of Israel's genocide, the BDS movement has grown exponentially, exerting pressure on governments to take effective measures to end complicity in Israel's systematic crimes. People around the world are demanding lawful sanctions on Israel now. Take the recent example of the largest trade union federation in Norway, voting with an overwhelming majority for a full arms embargo and an economic, academic, cultural, sports boycott of Israel. States must respond to the demands of their people grounded in international law, and we are beginning to see this happen. From Colombia suspending relations and coal shipments to Israel, to Malaysia and Namibia closing down ports to arms and other shipments to Israel, to Turkey suspending trade, all states must join this momentum. The resilience of our people under apartheid and genocide in our homeland and in forced exile, and the massive and growing solidarity movement led by the BDS movement are perhaps the only hope to salvage the multilateral system based on the rule of law and the promise of never again. But the threat of total elimination is real, and our people's resilience cannot on its own save us or the system of the rule of law. States must take immediate and effective actions now to, 1, impose a full and comprehensive military embargo on Israel, 2, suspend Israel from the UN General Assembly, 3, re-establish the UN Special Committee Against Apartheid as an effective mechanism to prevent and punish Israel's apartheid, and 4, mobilize enough pressure on this institution, on the UN, to adopt ethical procurement and corporate partnership policies that exclude companies that are complicit in grave human rights and international law violations. My grandmother Mary and millions of Palestinians everywhere, especially in Gaza, are counting on your solidarity and resolute fight to end complicity. This is not charity. This is upholding ethical and legal obligations. Sanction Israel now. Thank you.